Paul Lewis is a puppeteer who was building puppets and molding creatures at an early age. A trained opera singer and an accomplished actor, Paul's puppetry credits include Bobby the Gopher Boy on the hit Netflix series Sweet Tooth and the menacing M3gan, the killer robot from the hit 2022 science fiction horror film of the same name. I talked to Paul Lewis about his puppetry career on this first episode of Season 7 of Under the Puppet. You're listening to Saturday Morning Media. And now, back to our show. Welcome to the show that is preserving puppetry through the personal stories of professional puppeteers. My name is Grant Pachoco, and this is Under the Puppet. Paul Lewis, welcome to Under the Puppet.
Thank you for having me.
I'm super excited to have you here, and I'm a huge Sweet Tooth fan, which I think I told you in my email, and yes. I don't know how it is there in New Zealand, but the movie M3gan is like a cult phenomenon already here in the United States, so I'm very excited to talk to you about all these things, but I do want to start, as I always do, by asking you, do you remember your first exposure to puppetry, the first time you saw puppets?
Well, I was born the year that Sesame Street first went to air. So basically, Sesame Street has been, I know for a lot of people, younger generations, it's been in their lives, their entire lives. But it just kind of felt like we started at the same time in terms of just life. So it was Sesame Street. And I'm sure there were other influences that have kind of faded from memory. I am sure there would have been people who came to my primary school. In fact, I do kind of have a memory of a marionette show that came to the primary school I went to. But they didn't capture me. The marionettes didn't capture me, even though it was really fun, in the way that Sesame Street did. And I think that's because I started drawing at a young age and really wanted to be a cartoonist. And so what I was looking at was cartoon characters brought to life, essentially, because that's what the Muppets did so well with their design, is that they are essentially cartoons turned into fleece and foam. Characters, and so I was really captivated by those designs from Sesame Street. And then when I was 5, the Muppet Show aired on TV for the first time, and it was like, oh wow, yeah.
And you mentioned the cartooning. That was something you were doing from an early age, is drawing?
Yeah, there was, he has since passed, a famous New Zealand cartoonist, Murray Ball. He was famous in Australia as well, and I believe the UK. He created a cartoon strip called Foot Rot Flats, which was essentially the adventures of a farmer, a New Zealand farmer, and his dog called Dog. So Wolf, Foot Rot, and Dog, and a whole cast of characters. And they were incredibly appealing and so funny, and it just really had that New Zealand flavor. But I loved the artwork as much as the humor. Murray Ball's drawings were so fantastic, and he had such a great way of encapsulating a character on the page. And I was so taken by those cartoons that I started to teach myself to draw using his style as my kicking off point. And I had other influences as well. Carl Barks, who drew Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge and so forth. He was a huge influence as well. Tintin and Asterix. Asterix was a massive favorite for me. But in terms of just character design, it was Murray Ball. To my everlasting regret, I never got to meet Murray before he passed, and I always wanted to. And the last few years of his life, he had dementia, so it wasn't really possible to go and meet him. But yeah, that's where I started.
And were you just drawing pictures, or you were drawing your own comic strips or your own stories?
Yeah, I went straight into trying to create my own comic strips, trying to understand the structure and the form of how a cartoon is created, the sort of the 3-act structure where you set it up in terms of a joke, and also just the economy of the artwork within the frames. I spent a lot of time studying how that was done and then trying to emulate it myself, making the artwork as clear as possible. It was all about the line work and how you could overload it with too much detail. So all of that I was very aware of as I just read and read and read all the cartoons I could get my hands on. It used to be, back in the day, I don't know if this is something that you remember, but the newspapers used to have comic strips published in them. And like for us, it was the Auckland Star, if I remember correctly, and they had one page that was just full of like Garfield and Hager the Horrible and so many other cartoons, including Foot Rot Flats. So I'd look forward to the newspaper every day and seeing all the cartoons there, and I'd just stare at them. Not only read them, but also just stare at them and just really go into quite a focused state of like analyzing all the line work, how each cartoonist had their own approach, what pens, what brushes they used, did they use Indian ink, did they use some kind of felt pen, all of that. So I was very, very focused on trying to get my art to look like theirs, to have that kind of quality to them.
And you also, I watched a couple interviews with you and read a few things. By age 10, like you were trying to figure out how to build puppets, right? When you were pretty young.
Yeah, I was, and it was really because the first few years of my life, Sesame Street, had me in its thrall. I thought the characters were great and really funny, and there were so many characters I loved on Sesame Street. But when the Muppet Show came out in the first season, there was a character introduced who's still around called Uncle Deadly. And when I
Hmm.
saw that character, because I was already into movie monsters and I remember begging my parents when I was 5 to take me to see Jaws because I was mad on sharks, and here was a movie about a monster shark. I was like, "This is great," and they quite rightly refused to take me along. So when I saw Uncle Deadly, I was just captivated by that design, and I was like, I want to build a puppet like that. And then there's a making of the Muppets called of Muppets and Men, where they went behind the scenes and took you into the workshop. And I saw all that and was just like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. But I remember one of the things that really, really fascinated me as well was seeing footage of Gonzo being puppeteered by Dave Goelz and no legs on the puppet, but a sleeve instead. And I saw that and I was like, that's how it's done. So you don't worry about the legs. They've got sleeves to hide. And I thought that was brilliant. I thought that was so cool. And that kind of got me really wanting to make puppets because I love the whole smoke and mirrors of it. What you
Hmm.
don't see, particularly with TV puppetry, what you don't see below the frame. Yeah, so it was kind of like all of that coming together. But there was nothing here in New Zealand to teach me to make puppets in the style of the Muppets. Nothing at all. No books. So I just found books on making soft toys and just figured out how to convert those into puppets. I just winged it. So yeah, that's how I sort of started.
In an interview, you said your aunt helped you learn how to sew or
Yeah,
sewing
yeah,
machine or yeah.
yeah. My dad's sister, Lyndon, she was awesome. She was really great. She was like, this kid wants to make puppets and stuff. I'll teach him how to hand sew. And she was like, this is a great skill for you to have anyway. Nobody should be, you know, having to sew buttons for you or repair clothes and so forth. So you need this as a life skill. So she taught me to hand sew. She taught me to machine sew, but I preferred hand sewing, which is still how I really operate when I make puppets. And so, given that tool, I was then able to move forward. And she also taught me just some of the fundamentals of how you cut patterns or create patterns and cut cloth. And then I was just away with it after that. And yeah, I just experiment. Just basically, I kind of did what Jim Henson did. I kind of purloined things from around the house that perhaps I wasn't allowed to cut up and turn into puppets. But I would just find stuff and be just like, and then just cut it up and turn it into a creature or whatever. And from there, I sort of progressed to buying felt, and there's a local material shop where I lived on the North Shore in Auckland, and so I'd buy sheets of felt. I couldn't afford very much, so they were just small squares of felt, and I would just try and build a puppet out of the limited resources I had. My parents kind of just left me to it. They didn't really contribute to me making puppets. I was just sort of left to my own devices, and so I had to learn to be resourceful in that way and figure out how to allocate my pocket money the best way I could to get in the stuff I needed.
Yeah, well, and we're going to talk here because I know that you kind of left puppetry but went into performing, and you say your parents just kind of left you to the puppet work. Were your parents creative at all? Did you get any of your creativity from them?
Neither of my parents is particularly creative in terms of what they've done with it. Mom used to do sign writing for local shops. and she had so special brushes and poster paint that we couldn't touch. So I couldn't use her tools. I had to buy my own. But that's fine because by then I was sort of researching what cartoonists actually use. Dad was very business focused, so he never. I've never seen him so much as pick up a pencil and try and draw something. One of my brothers is a fabulous painter, but he's never done anything with it. And the both of my brothers love music and have like played instruments in a sort of a band that they got together and just for jamming, more like a hobby rather than anything else, just as a way of blowing off steam. And one of those brothers is also he's done script writing, but again, they've never really done anything with those talents, those things. I was the only one who really went and did something with it. It's not really present in my family on either side. There's kind of a thin vein of creativity, but nobody else has ever done anything with it.
You were pretty young. You were cartooning and you were building these puppets, but then you sort of got bit by like the acting and performing bug, right? Not that puppeteering isn't performing. People always say like, "Come on, puppeteering is performing," and I know that because I'm a puppeteer. But you you kind of you wanted to perform without a puppet.
Yeah, and I mean, just prior to getting the performing bug, I was really wanting to do creature creation. I really wanted, I was getting into magazines like Fangoria and really studying how special effects makeup and creature design and creature fabrication was done because I was a teenager of the 80s, and this is when it really started to kick off with all those fantastic practical effects appearing in movies like The Thing and American Werewolf in London and The Howling and Gremlins and all those movies. And that kind of took the place of puppetry for me in terms of the Muppet style puppetry. I started to think about creature puppetry instead, creature creation and creature performance. And but then I did my first school show when I was 16, and it was just like, wow, this is awesome, and sort of discovered I could sing and kind of went from there and started training as a singer. My first professional gig was with Opera New Zealand in the chorus, as in the second tenor line, and I spent a few seasons with them singing, and that's how I got my professional start as a performer. But I agree, puppetry is performing. It absolutely is. It's a different way of doing it. I think it's Louise Gold said it's like having a costume from the elbow up, and I love that. It's just like it absolutely is. And as somebody who is an introverted extrovert, which I've heard before, I think Laura said similar. As I discovered, I am a shy performer. I don't like the spotlight being on me. But if I've got a character that I can channel all that through, then that's actually really what works best for me. But it took a long time to realize that maybe I should have stuck with puppetry rather than trying to be an actor because I was just kind of like it was like anytime I had that attention, I kind of like, nah, stop looking at me.
Yeah. Well, I want to back up a little bit. I mean, I know I jumped into the singing and performing, but since you brought it up, the special effects makeup and the creature stuff, you've already mentioned that when you saw comic strips, you broke them down, you figured out how they were done. When you saw puppets, you broke them down, you figured out how they were done. Did you do the same thing with creature effects too? Did you start making your own creatures?
I absolutely did. I got clay and I got sculpting tools and I started. In fact, I started out with plasticine. Again, I didn't have a huge amount of money. Again, I didn't really go to my parents and say, "This is what I want to do. Can you please fund this?" I just had to figure it out based upon the financial resources I had, which was essentially like money from when I was a young teenager. I had a paper run, so I earned a bit of money that way. And so, yeah, I learned how to sculpt. I learned how to make molds. I used plaster of Paris, so that was a whole process there and learning curve. And then I slip cast the molds with latex, liquid latex. So I would buy a liter of liquid latex from a company here called Para Rubber, which is still around, and um, and try and put together creatures that way. So yeah, I spent a long time, and there were more. Luckily, there were more resources for learning that than I had with making puppets. So there were more books about how to make molds, how to how to do casting in latex, how to sculpt. And then I was into magazines like Fangoria, um, where they showed you the processes. And so I was buying as many magazines as I could that actually showed me how artists like Rick Baker and Rob Bottin and Dick Smith and so on, how they created these things. And so what really limited me more than anything was just my financial resources. I just there was only sort of so far I could really go. But yeah, that definitely dominated most of my teenage years before I got into because when I started performing, I was 17 or so. It was my last year of high school. Then I kind of it was sort of like a mixture of the two for a little while, where I was still designing and sculpting and mold making and making these creatures, but then also really getting into studying singing and performing, and then slowly the creature and puppetry side of things just faded away as I just obsessively got into singing and acting.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about your training in singing and acting. Where did you go to study?
I didn't go to an institution. I had a singing teacher for many years, Janice Webb. She was fabulous, and so I was with her for the longest time, all throughout my 20s. And in terms of acting, I did like a whole bunch of amateur theater. I just all the shows I could get into. The amateur theater scene in New Zealand was certainly very big when I started out in the 90s, and like North Shore Operatic and Auckland Operatic and so many areas had these dramatic societies where you could do shows and just kind of and there'd be a mixture of professionals and amateurs in there in the casts, and so it was a way of just sort of exercising those muscles and just dipping the toes in the water. And then I just started auditioning professionally for things and began living the performer's life of, like, lots of rejections and every now and again getting something. So but musicals and opera were kind of my bread and butter most of my 20s.
How would you say? Because I don't. I mean, I'm sure there are other puppeteers who are trained opera singers. But I thought it'd be interesting to ask. How has your opera training helped your puppetry? Is there any sort of crossover?
Yeah, other than just being completely comfortable when doing a puppet character who sings, not really. I guess perhaps vocal training helped me learn to look after my voice. So when I'd create a character and you figure out the voice as you go along. When I create a puppet character, I don't stress about what the character sounds like. I try and find the personality first, and then figure out how the voice then comes through that, how he expresses himself or she expresses herself vocally. So I don't start with a voice. So yeah, I think it's just more the thing of, like, particularly with some characters where you can potentially strain your voice. I just learnt the fundamentals of supporting the voice and looking after the vocal folds so that I don't lose my voice when playing a character. So I could potentially be screaming and raging as a character, but it won't hurt my voice.
Yeah. So you would, I'm sure, I'm assuming the answer is going to be yes, but for up and coming puppeteers, would you recommend like voice classes and
Yeah,
learning that? Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. There's I think that you should be, even if you just dip your toes in it a little bit, some acting classes, some improv classes, voice classes, singing classes, movement classes. Don't be too stuck in the idea that all the performance is just from your elbow through your hand. Just being aware of your body can help with all of that. I think all of it is useful in some way. It's all a toolbox, and you just dip in and you use what tools are useful to you. Yeah, I would absolutely recommend that.
Excellent. Well, you left New Zealand, right, to perform in Europe, right?
I yes, my now ex-wife and I decided we'd relocate to London to seek our fortunes there, because we'd worked professionally here. We'd done some work in Australia, and so we wanted to see if we could strike out and hit the West End and make our fortunes there. And it did not go it did not go well. So yeah, it was just kind of years of frustration and just sort of getting recalled for things but not getting cast. I started writing while I was over there, so I started focusing on writing. I wrote a play and I put it on an off West End venue. And because I started to think, well, maybe performing is not really where I'm supposed to be. Maybe I need to go back to the things I enjoyed, which was writing when I was a kid. And so I started writing stories and I started writing screenplays, learned how to write screenplays, learned how to write plays. And so I started doing that whilst I was in London. And but I got bits and pieces, I got like little film roles here and there, just like nothing stuff, featured stuff. But yeah, I think part of me was just starting to fall out of love with performing, but I was still stuck in the habit of being an actor, trying to, just the grind of just doing the day job. I think I was a bit stubborn and refused to give up when perhaps I should have given up, or I wasn't correcting the mistakes I was making because I found myself not enjoying the audition process. And so that's what I would take into the room with me. It was not a joy of the craft and not a joy of being present as an actor and then presenting myself. So I would just end up sabotaging myself and kind of being okay with that, which is not good.
Right.
So yeah, so by the time we left London 7 years later, we came home because there was a family member who was very, very ill. I was ready to move on. And when we came back home, I joined the police, the New Zealand police, as a 111 communicator taking emergency calls. And I did that for 3 years because I was like, I've done nothing really substantial with my life. I've tried to be a professional performer and it's been hit and miss and I've had a lot of fun and I've also had a lot of sort of disappointment but also as hardworking as I am, I'm also perhaps not quite as motivated and as driven as I used to be when I was much, much younger. So I wanted to contribute to the community. And so my father-in-law is an ex-cop, and he said, "Have you ever thought of, because with your speaking voice, the way you talk with people and so forth, did you ever think of just becoming a dispatcher, a communicator, and maybe doing that for a while and figuring things out?" So I did, and yeah, so that's what I did for 3 years. Nothing to do with performing at all during that time.
No funny voices on the on the radio.
That is definitely not the place to do funny voices. Though,
Yeah.
though I tell you what, I mean, you absolutely met some wonderful characters in that job, and there were just times where I was just like, I gotta write down the particulars of this job because this could inform a character in a screenplay or something like that if I ever get back into it. And then something that I did that was kind of a little bit crazy in some ways is that after 3 years of, almost 3 years of that, a cousin of mine had a friend who works as a drama teacher at my old high school, or worked there, Rangitoto College. And I was at a party and talking to him, and he was like, just chatting about my background and stuff. He said, "Have you ever thought of teaching drama?" He said you should become a drama teacher. It'd be amazing. Although I'd auditioned for drama school and got into a drama school here in New Zealand when I was 23, I'd never gone through a formal institution for training. And I just sort of thought at the age of 39, well, maybe I could be a teacher, but I'd need to be qualified and I'd need a drama qualification. And but also maybe I just need to start again. Maybe I just need to wipe the slate clean as a performer and just go back to school. So that's what I did. I auditioned for drama school and at the age of 40 became a very old student in amongst a bunch of 20-year-olds and did that for 3 years.
I think there's something though about, people say like you mentioned writing. Like if you write something and you write a novel and then you just put it away for a while and then you come back to it, you kind of see it with fresh eyes. So do you think that's what happened?
That's exactly it. I knew I was the problem when it came to being a performer, that I just somehow needed shaking up. And although I was pretty disciplined and focused in many ways, I think I let fear get in the way a lot. I think I allowed my anxiety to take over quite a bit as well. And that I didn't seek out help to get the tools to deal with all that so I could get out of my own way and do the thing I really wanted to do. Because I realized that I actually really did want to do it. I just had all this stuff in the way, emotionally and mentally. But I thought, oh, maybe just going to drama school would be a great way of doing that. And you know what? It actually turned out to be a great thing that I did. It's got me back on my feet. It got me loving acting again, got me loving singing again. And it's because of that experience that I was reconnected to puppetry.
Yeah, well, let's hear that story. How did puppets make their way back into your life?
I was out of drama school for a few years, quite a few years, and I was touring New Zealand and musicals with a small company, and just living the life of a jobbing actor, so just doing bits and pieces here and there, and but doing okay, and not thinking, oh, maybe it's time to give up again. I was actually doing well enough that I thought, oh yeah, I can keep doing this. And then one of my classmates had auditioned for a place called Woe Studios in Henderson, which was just getting on its feet. And she was part of a small group of people who, like herself, were actors who were puppeteers, with the exception of one, John Coddington, who has been a dedicated puppeteer and puppet maker for most of his life. And they were mentored by New Zealand puppeteer Jeremy Dillon and Peter Linz. And because the creator of Woe Studios, David Sutherland, connected with Peter Linz, went to America and connected with him and other Muppet performers. And Peter came to New Zealand and trained that initial cast. And the idea was that Woe Studios, they'd create live theatre shows, puppet shows, and kids would come in and see the shows, and there would be this amazing playground for them to go into, and a toy shop and a restaurant. It was a very ambitious idea, very cool. And then they'd do TV shows and movies with the characters that were created, Custard and his friends. This character Custard, all kids. Then it kind of fell apart for a while. I can't remember why. Maybe it was to do with the financial situation. And there was a gap of about a year before it all kicked off again. And so my classmate, Charlene Huang, came to see a show I was in, and she was raving about her experience learning from Peter Linz, learning from Jeremy Dillon, and she was like, if this takes off, it could be so cool. And she goes, "You're into puppets, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." She said, "You should absolutely take part in this." She said, "You'd love this." She said, "But it's all sort of been put aside for now. They're on hiatus, but keep an eye out, and I'll try and let you know when it kicks off again." And I just so happened to catch an audition notice on a website here called The Big Idea, which is all things performing arts. And it said, "We're looking for puppeteers of a high professional standard to audition, blah, blah, blah." And I thought, well, I have no issue with like the lip sync and so forth like that because I taught myself when I was a kid. But I knew that I kind of needed to get into shape. So for the first time in 30 odd years, I designed and created a puppet and I built it. And this time I had the resources of YouTube. So the first person I found was Adam Krudinger, and I just was like, okay, great. So I watched his videos and was like, okay, so that's what's expected, when it comes to a professional puppet build. Built this puppet, went along, auditioned, and they cast me as the character of Custard, and I went from there. And so I spent the next 4.5 years as a full-time member of the company, and we just did live show after live show, this beautiful set, and then we ended up doing 2 seasons of a TV show as well with the characters and learned so much. So Peter Linz came down for the first season and mentored us through that. An incredible experience. It was the producer of that TV show, Mel Turner, who then brought me into Sweet Tooth. In fact, she brought all of us principal puppeteers for Woe Studios into Sweet Tooth. But I'll just go back a bit. It's at Woe Studios that I learnt, I became a professional puppet maker because I immediately started getting back into the whole thing of how puppets are made and just started designing and building puppets, taking them in, showing the boss and going, "This is what I've done. My goal is to create characters for you that we will use in the shows and the TV show." And that's exactly what ended up happening. Quite a few characters that I built ended up doing shows, and appeared in the TV show as well.
Excellent. Well, I do, before I of course want to talk about Sweet Tooth, but before we get
Yes.
there, I do want to talk a little bit more about Custard's world. Was there any sort of anxiety or trepidation where suddenly you're the lead? Like the show's called Custard's World and you're Custard. Was there any nervousness about that, or was it like, no, I can do this. It's fine.
Well, I just realized that I've missed a part of the story. I was initially cast as Custard's best friend, Buzz.
Okay.
And when I went in, they actually, it was John, I believe, that they were going to cast as Custard, but John was super busy, as he always is. He's in demand with a show, and he couldn't join us for several weeks of rehearsals for the first live show. and he could only come in sort of at the very last minute, the last couple of weeks. And I can't remember the exact reason why, but the boss decided that because Custard was such a huge part of the show and Buzz was a small part of the show, that John would um, probably be better suited to doing Buzz just for this particular live show. I would do Custard, and then we'd swap over. But it actually turned out that we both suited the characters that we ended up getting. Buzz, he's just like, he was a much better Buzz than me. And Custard's personality just really suited my personality. And the voice just came so easily. And so, yeah. But after that, it was just kind of really comfortable playing the role. The only time I felt any real stress was actually when we did the TV show because, like, Peter Linz is just, he's very, it's all about specificity and so forth like that. And so it was trying to meet his standard that sort of made me the most nervous.
And what were these? Were these live shows? Were they touring shows? Like you would go around at different places, or was it just in one place?
It was all based at Woe Studios. So the expectation was that people would come to Woe Studios, they'd see a show, they'd go into the restaurant, the kids would play in this incredible urban playground, which was massive, and it would be an all-in-one experience. So yeah, that was the idea.
That's pretty amazing. And how do you think doing the live shows with these characters help prepare you to do the series with the characters?
It just gave us the opportunity to every day hone our craft because we would do sometimes two shows a day, 5, 6 days a week, and learning how the characters elicited an audience response and how the audiences responded to how the characters behaved. And you, it was just the very act of doing the puppetry that just made us all better, made us stronger performers, and also just that thing of being able to explore a character, really explore a character, because we didn't set the show and then just run it. We had freedom to improvise within the show as well and to find moments. And we did that constantly. And then with subsequent shows, no two shows were alike performances, I mean. So there would always be something, mistakes would happen. We would learn to not respond but with fear, but with joy and with glee at moments that we could take advantage of and try and find a joke or find a way to make it fun. And it just became, it was so much about playing. We had so much fun.
Excellent. I do want to ask, working with Peter Linz, did you have any sort of, did he give you any sort of tips or tricks that you still use to this day?
It was just all the fundamentals of like how a character is presented on screen in terms of like making sure that you always keep two eyes clearly in the shot. That thing of just slightly angling the head when it's so that the character looks strong when on screen. We use that all in the stage shows as well. All of those techniques are just how to move your body in a space when you're far away and then coming forward towards camera. I use that for Megan. I use that for Sweet Tooth when performing Bobby. All of those things that we learnt from Peter, I incorporated into those more realistic characters as well. They're super useful for any kind of screen puppetry.
Well, let's talk about Sweet Tooth and Megan. Was it fun finally being able to work professionally with sort of these creatures that you had been enamored with for so long?
Absolutely. The first time I got to interact with any character from Sweet Tooth was in the pilot. So Mel brought all of us Woe Studio puppeteers, the five of us principal cast, in for one scene in the pilot, and it's in the hospital with all the little babies, the baby hybrids. So those were all animatronic puppets, and we needed two people per puppet. So there were Fractured Effects in LA, led by Justin Raleigh, created all the creatures for Sweet Tooth and get like Gus's ears and so forth, all the prosthetics. And for the pilot, which was shot separately from the rest of the season, we were actually filming just down the road from Woe Studios. We could walk to the studios where they were filming Sweet Tooth, which was awesome. So we went in, and I can just remember the first time going in, and Justin's there, and seeing these incredibly beautiful puppets, so fantastically made, so detailed, and they were just all of them gorgeous. And there's like a kitten hybrid and an owl hybrid and a puppy hybrid, and orangutan hybrid and so on. And they were incredible. And I was so entranced. And I immediately just started yapping at Justin. And it's just like, I was like, the seaming work is fantastic. I can't see the seaming. We're like, blah, blah. I was just asking questions. And the two other guys there, unfortunately, I can't remember their names. It was so incredible to me to see these things for the first time that I'd always wanted to work with in real life and to be able to handle them and then perform them. It was just like if I was an emoji, it'd be like the love hearts in the eyes. It was as soon as I saw them, it was like this is the stuff I want to do. This is really
Yeah.
what I want to do. Is this kind of performance? Particularly, I do really enjoy the kind of like the group effort to bring a puppet character to life. I do love that, you got to kind of all work together. So we were paired off. It was just, yeah, it was just great. So we spent an afternoon rehearsing because there was a lot to get to grips with each of those little babies. And then we came back a couple of days later and we shot the scene. It was my first time meeting Jim Mickle, the showrunner, and I remember because I'm always kind of like I've always been one to make suggestions, always been one to who thinks of a gag and it's just like, well, what about if we try this? And I said to Jim, as far because I had the kitten baby, and I said, would you like to see me do something like this? Have him just sort of like lick his paw and then just wipe behind his ear a little bit. He goes, oh, I like that. Let's do that. So yeah, if you look very carefully, because the kitten baby is right dead center, sort of towards the bottom half of the screen. If you watch the pilot again and look, you'll see the kitten baby go lick, 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 and then just go behind his ear.
Excellent. Well, and let's talk about Bobby because Bobby, the Gopher Boy, is such a
Yes,
great character.
yes,
And I would love to know. And I know that you were working on the first season, and then you kind of took him over for the second season that hasn't come out yet. But
yes.
and I would just love to talk a little bit about the character, but also how that rig works because you've posted some pictures on your Instagram, which I'll link to in the show notes. But it just looks like a really fun and interesting and maybe difficult rig to use.
Yeah, I mean, the first season, Bobby, the way we puppeteered him is almost completely different to how we puppeteered him for the second season. We learnt a lot from the first season. He's only in 4 episodes in season one. We had up to 6 people puppeteering him. So we had three, if I remember, on the facial expressions, animatronic facial expressions, because he had complete expression in his head. He could smile, he could chew, he could, like his jaw could move side to side, his nose could wiggle, his brows would move, his eyelids would blink, his eyes would move, and even his ears would wiggle, which was later something that was dropped from the puppet because you couldn't really see it. He had servos in his neck to move his head, and then we had rods in his arms and rods in his legs, and we also had a full body walking rig as well, which I used. And we learnt a lot from that. We learnt very quickly that because I did the physical puppetry for him, so I was moving the body through the space. Initially, I had a rod in the back of his spine, and I'd just be positioning him, and then we had a puppeteer making his head move remotely. But it didn't give us a lot of freedom. It was quite at times we didn't have a huge amount of time sometimes to create a performance. And so with so many people to coordinate, it could be a bit of a rush to try and get everything working freely. And it was, I think, our second shot that we did that we realized that if we took the servos out of the neck and that put a rod in the back of the head for me so I control both the body and the head, it would just be a lot faster and efficient to get a performance from everybody. So that's what we did after that. But yeah, with the body rig, I was able to walk him around, which was so much fun. So I had control of his head and his legs for that first season. And so we were able to reduce it down from 6 people to about 4 people to perform him for season one.
Yeah, well, it's such a fun puppet, and there was some I saw some behind the scenes stuff as I was getting ready for this interview, and there was like one where he just runs up to the camera, looking up at the it's like just very
Yeah,
cute, even behind the scenes. It's such an engaging little character.
absolutely. And this is one of the magic things with puppets. I found was just reiterated with Bobby is that the performer gets forgotten and sort of fades into the background, and people just see the character. And so, particularly if I was in the walking rig and was able to, the improved walking rig that we had for season two, where I had full control of his body, including his arms, nobody would see those rods extending out the back of him. Nobody would see me. They would just be seeing this cute little character who was interacting with them, and they'd respond to him. And it was always so much fun to just bring him out and, say he was just waiting in the wings to go on or whatever. And if we had guests on set, just bring them over and they'd just be interacting with him. We wouldn't even have the full complement of puppeteers, wouldn't even turn on his animatronics. But if I was just moving his head and his body and somebody just grabbed his arms, even just that simple movement was enough to engage people. You didn't need to go
Yeah.
the full complement of performance.
Well, and I saw an interview you did where you talked about this, and it's kind of the same thing with Megan too. It's this character like Bobby and like Megan, you could do it with CGI. And you're not doing it with CGI, you're doing it with practical effects. And do you feel that that makes the performance better from not just the creature, but from the people interacting with the creature?
Absolutely. And I think Violet, who played Katie in Megan, she loved interacting with the puppet. And of course, she became best friends with Amy Donald, who did all the stunt work as Megan, because they're the same age. And so Violet was very comfortable around the animatronic. And yeah, if I started playing, if the cameras, were turned off and we were just between takes, and I just started moving the head or whatever, she'd just respond to it. And it was the same with Alison Williams, who played Gemma. Just having that character right there to interact with, it absolutely makes a difference. It gives them something to respond to. Alison would she would say, "Oh, that's really terrifying," or what, after a take, or "That's so creepy," and so forth. So that helped her, get into that headspace. Yeah, because whereas if you're working with something that's just like a tennis ball on a stick, you got to work very hard as a performer to, you know,
Yeah.
and also it's just that physicality of the puppet being right there invading your space, and it's just very imposing and intimidating. Because Megan looks beautiful, she looks absolutely beautiful, but once she starts focusing on you, and once she starts responding to you with it's like, oh my gosh, she's so beautiful, but wow, she's scary as well.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of broke down how Bobby worked for us. Can you kind of break down how Megan was rigged and how you performed her?
Yeah, I mean, to an extent, with Megan, she was a very similar setup to Bobby, where she was animatronic. She had animatronics in her head, and an incredible range of expression in that. Beautiful, subtle expression. She could go from very, very sweet and listening and caring to full-on rage, and then everything in between. She could be sad, she could be happy, she could be sarcastic. It was actually really, really incredible to watch that performance. And that was Adrian Moreau of Moreau Effects Studio designed and fabricated her, along with his wife Kathy C. And between the two of them, Kathy is was the lead puppeteer, and Adrian was the supervising puppeteer on set. Between the two of them, they did the facial expressions, and then we had our animatronic technician, Devin Seaman, on set as well, and he took care of the automated dialogue. So the mouth and lip sync was all done, was linked up to a software system that ran the dialogue, and then he and Kathy spent many, many, many hours animating the lips and the mouth movements to match the words. So if anybody wanted a dialogue change on the day, it just wasn't possible because there was no way to do it on the fly. Because just like a sentence could take half an hour to get right to an hour sometimes. So they focused on the facial expressions and the voice, and I was the physical puppeteer, so I handled the body and the head. Sometimes I would be moving an arm, but we also had an assistant to the puppeteering team, Greg Eason. We would bring him in, and he would help me as well. But for the most part, because the animatronic was very, very still for the most part, all I had to focus on was just the head movements and just making sure that she looked good on screen and that she looked alive. But we had some challenges with that, and I found it pretty intense and demanding at times. It's such a simple setup, but it really wasn't, because there was a lot to deal with. and to get right. And with the body, I had a rod in the back of the body, and so I could move her as well. So I could do things like stand her up and sit her down and just move her slightly through the space.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what was there like one scene where you were just like, when you see it, you just go, I was so uncomfortable during that scene when we filmed that. Was there something that was just, I'm so glad this shot is over.
Many times. And in fact, there was one scene that we shot that ended up being replaced. I mean, it was done with Amy anyway. Anytime the puppet needed to do broad movements and move through the space, they did that more for the close-ups of the head because all of the dialogue, except for certain scenes, was performed by the puppet. And the only time there was dialogue performed by the digital replaced face on Amy was if it was movement that Amy was doing while speaking at the same time. That was too much for the puppet to do. So we had times where just making Megan walk, the puppet walk, she's very heavy and it wasn't easy to make her walk. And we had the additional challenge of the fact that we could not put me in a green screen or blue screen suit and then paint me out or an assistant puppeteer. We had to hide me all the time. So I was either directly behind her, and therefore technically in many shots I am right there, but hidden behind Megan, or lying under her or to the side. And it was often incredibly physically uncomfortable and demanding. At the end of the shoot, at the end of the 7 weeks that I spent on that show, the movie, I went and got a sports massage, and the masseuse said, "What have you been doing?" It's just like, yeah. Let me.
Yeah.
I'm not even going to go there. But yeah, just and also because I'm an older puppeteer, I'm in my 50s, so the body isn't as supple as it used to be. And even though I'm reasonably active and try and keep myself in shape, there were times where I would be trying to stay out of sight of so that the camera couldn't see me whilst doing a very tricky physical performance of the body and the head and have a view of a monitor and just straining the neck and straining because I couldn't be supported properly because of the setup. I wasn't able to just lie on something sometimes because maybe the puppet was moving and the rigs that we had just didn't really allow for it. Yeah, really, really hard work. Bobby was so much easier because he's tiny, and we also have had the luxury of putting me in a grey screen suit and being able to paint me out. So it didn't matter if
Yeah.
I was there in the shot with Bobby. But Megan, we could not do that.
Yeah, that was really interesting to hear because I think it was in another interview you talked about it, how there was no, they just were not going to paint you out. So you had to figure out how to do it on Megan. And, it's just, as I said before we did this interview, I haven't seen Megan yet. I've seen a lot of clips and videos and stuff. But it just looks like something was like, oh, yeah, I'm sure there's green screen there, but there's no green screen in it.
No, and I mean we did do some pickup shots that had a green screen. None of them were used, but we still didn't have the luxury really of painting me out. So we had
Yeah.
still had to hide me. So that meant that the way the puppet was performed meant that I also had to be very careful because there was a rod extending out the back of her head and going down. We couldn't puppeteer her internally to get the movements because of the internal structure. So I had to be careful with that rod as well. I couldn't have that rod appearing in shot. So there were lots of little mini demands to accommodate to get a performance. So yeah, it was some of the hardest, most demanding puppetry I've ever done. And yet when you look at it, you go, but that looks really simple. It's like it really wasn't. It really wasn't. Bobby's hard work, but Megan was harder.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the film was a big hit here, and I know that they're already talking about sequels. So hopefully, maybe you'll get a chance to do it all over again if you
Maybe,
want to.
maybe. Yeah, I mean, like
Maybe.
originally the movie was supposed to happen in Canada. Then COVID shut it down, and so they came here to New Zealand, and it was on the back of Sweet Tooth that I got Megan. Yeah, so who knows if they come back to New Zealand for the sequel, Megan 2.0, then hopefully they'll ask me back. Otherwise, yeah, it's. I'm just more than happy to have been part of the original because that movie ticked so many of the boxes for me in terms of what I wanted to achieve. Going back to when I was a teenager and wanting to be in creature puppetry, helping to originate a movie monster who becomes iconic, um, and just so many things just from M3gan alone. I feel like, oh well, if I don't get to do any more puppetry for the rest of my life, I'm good. I've done so much of what I set out to achieve.
I wanted to ask about sort of the puppetry community in New Zealand. And, is it because like here I'm in Los Angeles and it's kind of like everybody knows each other. And I'm wondering if it's kind of the same out there. And are you a member of any guilds or, Unima or anything like that?
No, we don't have anything formal set up here, and there's a mixture of puppeteers spread all throughout the country. I'm not really part of a community here, so to speak. I know very few of the other puppeteers in the country. I know the ones that I've worked with, but there's other people who do puppetry for theatre, and so I have yet to meet. And there's very, very few of us working professionally, that this is our job. Myself and one other, John Connington, we seem to be just constantly working. But the other puppeteers that I know mix up their careers with performance and writing, doing theatre, doing TV, doing film, and so forth, and then come back to puppetry. There's one of the people I worked with at War Studios has created a company, Tusk Puppets, and she's based in Christchurch. But no, we've got such a tiny community here. Jeremy Dillon, who was one of our mentors at War Studios, he created a TV show called The Mo Show, which was very successful. I mean, he's probably our most successful puppeteer. But no, yeah, we're tiny here. It's a tiny pool of puppeteers.
Well, being a writer and being somebody who builds puppets, are you working on your own things? Do you have your own projects that you're trying to get going?
I have an idea for something that I'd like to do based around a puppet that I actually built as a commission, which is a different kind of puppet to what I've normally been building, which are Muppet style puppets in terms of like cartoon characters. And it's something that I'll look at down the line. I've been so enamored with the creature puppetry that I've been doing, and so spoiled by working on Sweet Tooth, because it's not just Bobby that I performed on Sweet Tooth, there are other characters as well. And that's just kind of sort of dominated my life and sort of taken over a little bit. And I want to do more creature puppetry. So no, I haven't been particularly motivated to go back to my original puppetry roots of Muppet style puppets and create a show. I think it's part of it is just trying to find something different, because there's a lot of voices out there. There's a lot of people creating content, and it's just very. I just find myself sort of thinking, well, it's all kind of been done. I don't really know if I have anything new to bring to the table. Um, but yeah, maybe this idea might work that I've got. We'll see.
Excellent. Well, we will look forward to it. As we wrap up, I always like to ask as the final question, what has been the highlight of your puppetry career so far?
I guess I got to say M3gan, just in terms of just the response to it and what I've got from it, but also Sweet Tooth, definitely like Sweet Tooth, just in terms of the range of opportunities for creature puppetry, having a voice in the room, being part of the creative process for that was massive. Being included in the creative process is something I'll always be grateful for and always thankful for. That was just an awesome experience. So yeah, those two particular credits, yeah, definitely highlights, the highlights.
Excellent. Well, Paul Lewis, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Many thanks to Paul Lewis for being on the show. For links to some of the things we discussed, check out the show notes for this episode number 81, over at underthepuppet.com. And if you'd like to hear even more of my chat with Paul Lewis, download the free Under the Puppet app for iOS and Android and click on the gift icon in the listing for this episode. Well, now it's time to announce the winner of episode 80's giveaway for an Inner Monster kit by Jamie Shannon and Puppet Island. The question was, what was the name of the Performing Arts Center that helped make the What If Puppets production in the workshop possible? And the answer was the Midwest Trust Center. And the winner is Kevin Meister. Congratulations, Kevin. Your Inner Monster kit is on the way. This episode, we're giving away the 2022 Jim Henson Company Christmas gift. Subscribers to the Saturday Morning Media YouTube channel got to see an unboxing of this gift that includes a light-up Fraggle Rock ornament and Fraggle Rock candles. I'll put a link to that video in the show notes. To be entered to win, all you have to do is answer this question from the episode you just heard. What emoji did Paul Lewis say his face resembled the first day he saw some of the puppets on the show Sweet Tooth? When you find the answer, send it in an email to underthepuppet@gmail.com with the subject line giveaway, and you'll be entered to win. All entries for this giveaway must be received by March 15th, 2023. The winner will be chosen at random from all correct entries and be announced on the April 2023 episode of the show. One entry per household, and due to recent issues shipping prizes to winners, these giveaways are now only open to those listeners with a mailing address in the United States of America. Good luck! Before we go, I wanted to say that this episode marks the start of the 7th season of Under the Puppet. Thank you to everyone who has downloaded, listened, supported, and shared episodes of the show over the years and helped make Under the Puppet the longest-running puppetry podcast on the internet. Thanks to my editor, Steven Staver, who makes these episodes sound so good, and thanks to my friend Dan Ring, whose song, Things Are Looking Up, is the theme of the show. I also want to send out a special thank you to all the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons who really do help make this show possible. Patreon patrons at the producer level and above who get a special shout-out are Eve Cunning, Kathy Crawford, Andrew Calcagno, Tony Urbano, Brandy, David Akers, Paul, Scott Armstrong, and Vicky Sebring. To become a patron, visit patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media. And thank you for your support. If you have questions, suggestions, or feedback about the show, call our voicemail line at 818-806-9604. Or you can click the Call the Show button in the free Under the Puppet app for iOS and Android. You can also send feedback via email to underthepuppet@gmail.com. Or you can connect with the show on Instagram, Twitter, and yes, we're back on Facebook, just by searching for Under the Puppet. And don't forget to tell a friend about the show. This episode featured music by Dan Ring and was edited by Steven Staver. Thank you so much for listening. Under the Puppet is copyright 2023, Saturday Morning Media, Grant Pachoco, executive producer. All rights reserved. www.saturdaymorningmedia.com. Under the Puppet proudly presents The Adventures of Timmy the Tooth Reunion. In this almost 90-minute video, you will hear great stories from the cast and crew who brought this amazing puppet show to life. Plus, you'll see never-before-seen artwork and exclusive behind-the-scenes video. Under the Puppet's Timmy the Tooth Reunion is available right now at timmy.underthepuppet.com. You've been listening to Saturday Morning Media. Stay tuned, we'll be right back.